In this prep for the domain and range of functions, we're going to look at ways you could interpret some of the features of the graph of a function. So let's look at a couple examples. And for this first example, we're given the graph of this parabola. And one of the things we could tell, well, there's many things we could tell about the graph of this function. So let's say, for instance, if we were asked to find where are the x-intercepts of the graph of this function. Well, the x-intercepts of the graph of the functions are these 2 points here that I just circled, which look like they're the points, we could say, that are x-intercepts. Look to be the points, one is 3, 0, and the other one looks like it's -5, 0. So that's one of the things we could interpret about the graph from the graph of the function. Now another thing we could tell is maybe, let's say, is when does this graph look like it's below the x-axis? So if we see that between these two x-intercepts the graph is below the x-axis, and to the left of this x-intercept, the x-intercept at -5, 0 looks like it's above the x-axis, and to the right of this x-intercept, the point 3, 0 looks like it's above the x-axis. So if we ask where is it below the x-axis, it looks like we could say that it's between -5 and 3 on the interval from -5 to 3. Not the point. That's one thing you got to be careful with, is that when you're writing the points of on the graph, or when you're talking about interval notation. So again, that's one of the things you do have to be careful about. Now there's also talking about when is it above the x-axis. So in this case we could say from -infinity to -5, and from 3 to infinity. Then another thing we could say is, okay, where does it look like the y-intercept is? And it looks like that point there. And in this case, it's not exactly on a point, but it turns out it's a point 0, -7.5. And we could also say, okay, what does it look like the domain of this function is based on the graph? And it looks like, well, we're assuming that it goes on, sorry about that, forever in both directions. So it looks like one thing we could say about the domain is that it goes from -infinity to infinity. And the range, well, let's see, what's the lowest it goes? It looks like it goes all the way down to -8. And what's the highest it goes? It looks like it would go all the way up to infinity. So that's some of the stuff we could interpret from just given the graph of the function. Now just looking at this one here, we could say a few things more. Let's say with this curve in red, it looks like we have what? Maybe 3 x-intercepts. Looks like our x-intercepts we could say are the points -2, 0, 0, 0, so the origin. And also it looks like maybe the point 3, 0. And then we could say, okay, when is it below the x-axis? Well, it looks like between -2 and 0, it's below the x-axis. And then when is above? Well, from -infinity to -2, and then from 0 to 3, and then from 3 to infinity. It doesn't matter if the question is asking if it's strictly above or strictly below. So there is a question of if it's on the x-axis. So again, by just looking at the graph, you could interpret a variety of things. And for this one, we could also say that the y-intercept is at the point 0, 0, because if it goes through the origin, then that point is both an x-intercept and a y-intercept.